So I want to get both of your thoughts, Joe, starting with you, about a study that I have in front of me, a recent study that says Amazon's ad revenue is going to grow roughly 470% by 2023. Where is that figure coming from in your mind?
In my mind, I think it's kind of coming from three main areas. I would call it funding, function, and growth. I mean, funding is, what budget bucket it's coming from. Typically, Amazon has been controlled by a sales organization within a company, and as it expands as a publisher and more people go to it just to consume information, I think you're going to see more budgets coming from a traditional marketing department. So I think it's coming from an expansion of where they're getting funded, sales and marketing. In terms of the function, I think that as they're the dominant, far and away the dominant search engine for product searches. So that's pulling money away from Google. And I think they'll continue to pull money away from traditional search engines because people are going to Amazon not only to purchase, the low part of the classic funnel, but now more and more for discovery. And so that's what the traditional search engines have been used for, is discovery. And it's become much more of a discovery engine. And the last one, I think, is just the growth of Amazon, the growth of the Prime customer, that attraction of Amazon as a place where you're pretty confident. First of all, you know you're going to find what you want, you're going to get it in 2 days, and you're going to get a compelling price. And there's all the content, reviews, and ratings that kind of validate your decision to purchase there. So just that massive growth in consumer appeal.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. I'll also just kind of add some context from my end. So I think maybe 2 or 3 years ago, a lot of the incremental budgets we saw with advertising were coming from trade spend. So most brands were still looking at Amazon first and foremost, really maybe exclusively as a retailer. And so they were saying, well, their target business was flat and maybe it was down, maybe another big retailer was down, Amazon's up 30%, so let's shift some of that budget into Amazon, but still basically using those sort of retail trade spend budgets. I think more and more you're still seeing those budgets shift because Amazon is still in most cases growing in terms of actual sales volume and can justify that. But you're also now, to Joe's point, seeing more of those traditional marketing budgets and actual advertising budgets shift incrementally to the trade budget. So you're sort of layering those on top of Amazon. I think what becomes an interesting problem to tackle maybe, or sort of a new challenge for these big consumer product brands, is that they basically it sort of throws your whole budgeting process out, because it used to be that you'd spend your advertising dollars with advertising platforms and you'd spend your retail dollars with retailers, and there was no overlap. It was one or the other. Now Amazon is really the first company ever who's big in both of those domains. So the question is, sure, you can spend from both of those parts of the companies, but you have to manage the budget holistically. And you might then have competing interests between those two parts of the company. So how do you kind of rectify that in a way that doesn't cause too much internal conflict and fully maximizes the potential on the platform? And I think we're seeing more and more companies now kind of be realistic about that, and that they do need to have a unified approach. But it's been kind of an interesting dynamic to watch. So
I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you had to come up with, if you have a brand coming to you and saying, this is how Amazon is doing things now, what advice would you give to brands coming to us, say?
Yeah, I would say really, you have to embrace the idea that that Amazon is a big retailer and they're a big advertising platform, and they are the country's premier product search engine, all at the same time. And if you can really be honest about that and embrace that, at least that gives you the foundational sort of understanding as an organization to then build capabilities, budgeting processes, etc. on top of that. I think, frankly, a lot of brands aren't even there yet in terms of that sort of general understanding. So I think that's a really important first step. And then obviously every company's going to do things differently. But typically what the lack of that understanding results in is just brands not spending enough. And it's easy for the agency to sit there and say, hey, spend more money. But the reality is, if you're looking at just the incrementality, the amount of customer reach, the amount of engagement in the platform and research, The access to different targeting capabilities, et cetera. Most brands, even today, are still underspending on the platform.
Right.
And I wonder if, I mean, you're much more of an expert on the retail side than me, but when I look at it kind of from my perspective, one of the limitations on spend from a traditional retailer point of view has been just that physically limiting shelf.
Yep.
And Amazon is literally the endless shelf.
Yep.
And so as long as the company is making stuff,
Yep.
that shelf will be there for you to sell it on.
Yeah, for sure, and totally. And so that's why retail budgets, it's the limited shelf, but it's also the limited foot traffic. I mean,
Sure.
you only have so many people walking into a Target store on a given day. Maybe if you do a really great job of marketing within that environment, you can get more people to walk into that store just to buy your product. And sure, there's some impact on that. The reality is you're always going to be somewhat limited to just the overall amount of traffic, doors, and shelf space you have. On Amazon, you have 60, 70, potentially 90%, depending on kind of the demographic that you're going after, of your customers engaging on the platform on a regular basis. They're there. They may not be looking at your product or buying your product, but they're doing something. Mm-hmm. They're watching a movie, they're buying a book, they're buying school supplies, whatever. And then the key is to get in front of them and show them your product and obviously have them convert. But it just means that the upside is so much greater than it would be even in a large traditional retail environment. So it just changes the whole concept of how you should be doing budgeting.